In conversation with Charles Baines. Charles Baines is a former journalist and marketing PR pro who has ghostwritten hundreds of articles spanning business, technology, and consumer products. Before starting his own agency, he spent 17 years with the leading New York agency representing such clients as Sprint PCS, Dow Chemicals, Hewlett-Packard, and Armstrong Floors. Early in his career, Vince became an internationally syndicated entertainment columnist, reviewing films and interviewing celebrities such as Tom Hanks, Kenny Rogers, and Patty Duke. He earned an MS in marketing e-commerce from the City University of New York and a BA in mass communications from Rutgers University, New Jersey. His stories in poem, his first book is available in hardcover, paperback, or ebook from Amazon, Barnes& Nobles, and the author's website www.sharkspaints.com. Baines lives with his wife, Mary, two cats, and a cockatoo in Leland, North Carolina. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, joy, and excitement to have on the show today, Charles Baines. How are you doing, Charles?
I'm doing just great, Peter. It's a wonderful day here after so many storms here,
Mm.
including on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast, so uh, things are uh, things are smooth here.
It's nice to have you, really, on the show. I'm quite excited. We're going to be having a lovely conversation around your beautiful works. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah. So, Shaz, I'd love to say that I found the description page of your book, Quick Stories and Poems, backwards, forward, and upside down on Amazon to be quite captivating and compelling. And I would like you to, tell us what inspired the making of the book, what inspired Quick Stories and Poem, and how the book came about. Would you like to tell us about that?
Sure. Well, Quirky Stories and Poems is a compilation of stories and poems that I
Oh,
started. One of them includes one that I wrote all the way back in high school. One included also included is one that I wrote during my college years.
oh.
Professionally, though, I was writing nonfiction and dealing with sometimes scientific subjects.
Mm.
Um, in my retirement here, I've been able to do more creative writing, and I joined a writing group a couple of years ago. We write every week, and
Oh,
sometimes we started out writing like in 20-minute bursts and from a prompt, and then we would conjure a story. So
wow.
that's how it started. And the book includes some that I've written more recently, as well as earlier works, including some poetry.
Mm. Oh, wow. That's quite amazing to know, really. That sounds like a lovely introduction into becoming an author. Sounds like a lovely introduction into becoming a writer. Thanks for sharing. Thank you.
I do enjoy the craft.
Yeah. And now for readers who haven't read the book yet, and of course, without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we'd expect in terms of themes and subject line, picking up quick stories and poems?
Sure. Well, the the stories are it's across a wide spectrum of ideas and themes.
Mm,
Some stories are just purely humorous, other ones are more serious. Some of them are both.
mm,
I like to write some science fiction. There's a few science fiction stories in there, and science fiction stories are between the lines serious. So I try to have something serious even in my lighter stories. But some of them are childhood recollections and they're pure entertainment.
oh, wow. That's amazing. I'm not quite sure if you have a copy of the book. Do you have a copy of the book there with you?
I do,
Yeah, please show
and
to the camera.
I could do it on a screenshot, but this is what the book looks like. This is the
Beautiful.
paperback
Yeah.
version.
Yeah.
There, that's
Yeah.
a little better.
Beautiful. Oh, that's quite
And
amazing.
a couple hundred pages. just shy of
Oh,
200 pages.
I love the
And it
cover design.
includes,
It's beautiful.
yeah, and it includes a lot of cartoons. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. And you saw the story behind the story is also quickie. Would you like to tell us more about what you mean by that?
Quirky can mean different things in different contexts. Generally, it means something that's odd or out of the ordinary or serendipitous.
Mm,
And I try to take a different look at sometimes ordinary things and find some new aspect to it.
mm,
But there have been quirky things that have happened while I started writing the book.
yeah.
And perhaps one of the quirkiest things that happened last year, as I was finishing the book, it was right before Easter.
Mm,
And I had written this book. Actually, it was before the coronation of King Charles,
oh,
and I had a story where you it's not clear who the subject is, but he's anticipating something momentous to happen.
mm,
And I give little tidbits about his background, what he's thinking. And along the way, you realize that he's a soldier, which means he might have a gun.
oh,
And I leave it kind of as a mystery. Well, what is he waiting for? So I had this story written,
mm,
and about a week and a half after I wrote it, my wife and I were at a craft fair in Wilmington, and I had stopped by this booth because no one else was there and chatted with this guy for a few minutes behind the counter.
mm.
And a couple of women walked up to him and said, Travis, how was your trip to London? And he said, it was great. He says, I waited outside for 3 days just to capture the moment of the procession. And my ears perked up. And it turned out he was waiting there to see Princess Kate.
Oh,
And he says, he says, do you want to see the money shots?
oh, wow,
So he had a perfect picture of, he says she even looked at me when she went past.
wow.
So that was precisely what my story was about.
Mm. Oh, wow.
So
That's
that
actually
was something quirky that happened.
absolutely. It's quite quick, really. Yeah. I love the description of it and the short story you've mentioned in there. Sounds very great. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. And I'd also like to ask you, Shaz, would you also love to tell us a bit about your profession as a former journalist and marketing PR? You also mentioned entertaining columnists for a feature syndicate, review movies, and interviewing TV stars. Could you tell us more about the people you interviewed and also a bit about your previous profession as a journalist? I hope you get my question, yeah?
Right. Well, I did start out as a journalist. I worked for a county newspaper,
Mm,
and being trained as a journalist, I'll just say we were, I was of the school that you tried to be objective and tell both sides of the story, and the reader would kind of decide, what was real and what isn't.
mm,
Today, that is that there's only, it seems that there is only advocacy journalism, and all
mm,
journalism has become subjective, which leaves the reader um, perhaps only hearing one side of the story. Anyway, I
mm.
only mention that because as a journalist, things have changed. People should know things have changed. And if you don't change the channel, you might
Mm,
only see one side of the world.
absolutely.
So that was very early in my career. I had an opportunity to work for a newspaper syndicate. This company produced television listings, which were distributed across the US, Canada, and to about 7 or 8 different countries around the world. And
Mm,
along with the television listings, they would also produce 20 pages of feature articles. So I was hired in the um, features department, and I was able to interview a lot of television personalities, as
wow.
well as stuntmen and jingle writers. I mean, I even interviewed a guy who set himself on fire. That was his job. He's a
Wow.
stuntman. They put on all kinds of cooling gel beneath their clothes so they don't get scorched. Uh,
Wow.
but I but I did have an opportunity to go to some movie openings. I went to, I don't know whether you've ever heard of the movie Caddyshack, but it was some kind of a sensation when it uh, first hit the screen. And this is going back to the 70s. But
Oh.
Columbia Pictures had, to promote the movie, they had a big party out in New York at Rockefeller Center. It's a sunken area where they often have a skating rink. Um, but in
Mm,
the summer, it was all empty, and they had one side was all kinds of main entrees. I had chef slicing roast beef, and on the other side, I was like all desserts, including chocolate fountains, and
mm,
in between were all kinds of movie executives and celebrities and media
wow.
people. So I was one of the media people. But this movie starred Rodney Dangerfield and Chevy Chase, Ted Knight, and Harold Ramis, who
Mm.
also directed it.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a lot you've got in there. That's a lot. Thank you so much for sharing. I enjoy you talking about it. I enjoy listening to the TV stars you've done so far. They're all quite
Yeah,
great, admirable, and quite fun.
I
Thanks
could
for sharing.
I could tell you one other story because that was just about a film.
Wow.
Uh, Sometimes I'd interview celebrities by phone. Sometimes I'd interview them in person. Sometimes I'd interview them in person and then meet them,
Mm,
uh, which is what happened with Kenny Rogers. I interviewed him on the phone and took a retrospective of his career
wow.
because he was in a band way back in the 60s that nobody had ever, well, I don't say nobody ever heard of. It was Kenny Rogers and the Fifth Edition.
Wow.
Um, but that was before he went out on his own. And um, one of his childhood dreams was to play Carnegie Hall. So he
Mm,
played Carnegie Hall with Dottie West and the Oak Ridge Boys. And this was
wow.
when he came out with his Gambler album. If you know Kenny Rogers, he's very well known for The Gambler. And they made a TV movie about it. So that was
Mm,
my opportunity to interview him.
wow.
So
That's
I got to see the show, and then after the show, they had a separate party
wow.
uh, at the 21 Club. You would walk in the door, and all the guests would receive a check that had
Oh,
his face on $1 million. There's Kenny Rogers, and somebody would sign it in calligraphy, and you walk upstairs, and they had it all set up like a casino
oh,
going with the
wow.
gambler theme.
That's
So there's more to
amazing.
that story, but that was the gist of it.
That's amazing. I love you talking about it. And I'd also like to ask you, how does timing figure into the way you structure quick stories and poems? Also, the end, you end the book with a longer story titled Stranded in Mysteries. Can you tell me about that as well?
Well, there's a lot in there, so let me just kind of break it down
Yeah.
one at a time. I mean, I've always been interested in timing and persuasion professionally. And of
Mm,
course, it also has to do with the way all kinds of stories and films are structured with, anticipation or waiting for what happens. And as a reader, you're always kind of anticipating what the action is or might be.
mm.
Um, one of one of the stories I wrote about is less than 100 words, and
Oh,
I drew
wow.
a cartoon for this, which I'll show you in a minute. Uh, and you don't know exactly what's happening, but this guy is standing in a hospital hallway,
Mm,
and so you're trying to figure out what is this guy doing, and uh, the people that he actually has something. It's not mentioned in the story, but he actually has something called tachypsychia, and he can he perceives time in a very slowed down way. I mean, his actions are very slow. He's moving very, very slowly.
wow.
And in his mind, he's protecting the hospital from disease. So
Oh,
I'll have to let you read the story so you can see what that's about. But that gives you an idea of um, an interesting way to think about time or to consider another kind of point of view in
wow.
how people, not everyone sees time normally, and some people have drastically different perspectives about time.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. That's
I've
quite.
often said that big disagreements in the world between people may be partly due to their perception of time. If you think about something like climate change, okay,
Mm,
some people are just about business or uh, keeping workers working, making profit in the process, and so
mm.
they have a much shorter view of time than environmentalists who are concerned about what is going to happen in the next generation or the generations to follow.
Oh, wow. That's quite amazing to know, really. I love your take on that. Thank you so much for sharing. I love to ask you too. One of the most interesting things to me as a writer is to listen to readers' feedback. And you may want to agree with me that one of the things that make literature to be complex in its entirety is the fact that it can be interpreted by different readers in different ways. Sometimes the readers might get a question intended by the author. Sometimes the readers might be close to getting the message intended by the author. Sometimes the reader could miss the message intended by the author. And this always leaves, a different perspective coming in via different readers. I'd like to ask you, as interesting as and as fun as it sounds, how do you feel when readers interpret your works differently than you intended? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, people can get whatever they want out of the stories that I write. I mean, sometimes I do write them, I'll say, with a message, but the
Mm,
message that people get may well
yeah.
be something entirely different than I intended.
Mm.
I have one story that I wrote, and um, it's very short, uh, and it's about a guy who becomes a politician, and
Oh,
his doctor. It's set in the near future, like 2035, and his doctor he has a high school football injury, and
oh,
his doctor gives him a choice. He can either fuse his neck vertebrae together, or
mm,
he can replace it with a spring.
oh, wow,
So so he's kind of flexible, and so he gets a spring.
wow,
And then he goes on and he college, and he ends up working for a company that makes eggs. They like him because he can because he has that spring head, he can pick out the bad eggs. So he works in public relations, or no, actually in HR and human relations, so he can pick out the bad people. And
Oh, wow.
and then he develops a political career, and it goes on. So he ends up becoming president.
Oh,
As
wow.
it's a humorous story, and I wrote it with, I'll say one, I'll say with a particular kind of politician in mind, and I found out after I wrote it that people could interpret it in just the opposite way from a different candidate perspective.
Hmm.
So I think politics is important, but um, I try not to wear it on my sleeve.
Wow.
But again, people end up, hearing what they want to hear or seeing what they want to see.
Hmm. That's
So
very true.
they'll watch media that they agree with, and it's
Yeah.
healthy to watch media that you disagree with or just get exposed to another point of view.
Yeah.
It's nice to be right all the time, but very few people are right 100% of the time. Just don't
Absolutely.
tell anyone.
I agree with you on that. And that's very true. And thank you so much for your lovely introduction and answer to that question. Now, apart from quick stories and poems, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on? Also, how do you handle criticism as a writer?
Well, let's see. I am continuing to write mostly short stories. I do have, I'll say, I've had an idea for a novel that I may cut into
Hmm.
or two, but I'm continuing to compile my short stories and hope to publish another book, perhaps late August or
Hmm.
sometime in 2025.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's quite amazing to know. Thank you. And
So
I hope
what was
that
the
goes
second part
well.
of your question?
Yeah, the second part of the question is how do you undo criticism as a writer?
Well, I get some feedback from my writing group on a regular basis, and um, you have to people hear, they can hear stories differently, so you have
Mm,
to take it with a grain of salt. But um, most people like my stories or seem to enjoy them,
mm,
and the criticisms are usually light.
wow.
So
So,
it's all part of the process. Yeah, you have to have a little bit of a thick skin, I think, to be a writer in the
oh,
first place.
that's interesting. Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks for sharing. And also, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered in the process of writing your book and also ever since it got published? Also, I like you now while answering this to show your cartoons, the ones you love to show to the audience.
Okay, let's see. Well, first on the publishing question, if you're a new writer,
Mm,
uh, I think unless you are, Ernest Hemingway or, uh, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald, you really need to self-publish just to get yourself out there. So that's what
mm,
I've done to promote myself. And writing the book may be the easiest part. Promoting it is another thing entirely. It's not, if you're a known author and you've sold hundreds of thousands of books, you'll have publishers, at your doorstep. But that's not most people's experience. So sometimes it takes longer to be discovered. Um,
mm,
but it helps if you have an agent too. I don't have one, I'll say yet, but you have to do some writing and be out there and create a presence for yourself, and things can grow from there.
mm. Wow, that's amazing, yeah. And I'd like you to show the cartoons.
Okay, let me just
Why showing them? I would love you to tell us about them to like a brief illustration. Why you show them
yes.
one after the other.
Can I
Ah, it
just start
works.
now
I can
or
see.
all right. So, as I said, my book is structured into different sections. It's the first section is backwards, so it includes stories about childhood,
Mm,
adolescence. Some of these are real, mostly not. And other stories are about looking to the past. So the book includes some children's stories. This is one that I wrote for my high school literary magazine called The Boy Who Loved Grape Jam. So he
mm.
dreams of a bear, and the bear ends up chasing him through the woods.
Wow.
Um, I also have very fond memories of growing up. I shared bunk bed with one of my younger brothers, and he was on the bottom, I was on the top. And and so I wrote a poem called Bunk Bed Brothers. So
Oh
that's
wow.
me yelling at him. He's kicking me from the bottom, and on the left over here we're looking at shooting stars. So
Wow.
that's the poem. Then another one. This was based on something that really happened. It just when I was a kid, I lived in rural North Carolina, and there was a farmhouse that was abandoned that we got into, and there was like an old calendar on the wall. So I made
Mm.
up a story about that,
Oh
and
wow.
And so this would have been my younger brother and me, and I have another kid in here.
Mm.
And I was make it also kind of spooky. So
Wow.
something terrible may have happened in this house.
Oh wow.
And so that
This
this one is called A Waking Nightmare.
1961, out of my chair.
Yep. Yeah. So this one is where do I
Who,
have this?
who did all of this? Are you the illustrator or someone else?
No, I did these illustrations.
Wow.
I got the idea to start doing some drawing.
Wow.
I saw a YouTube video and the
Oh.
guy said, you think you can't draw faces? Here's how you draw. Usually people have
Wow.
difficulty with eyes. So he says, you just draw two sixes.
Wow.
So
Oh, that's actually true. I can see now.
yeah, well,
So
so
it's
this
actually
one,
beautiful.
yeah, this one,
Out of my chair.
this was a one of my future stories.
Oh.
So this one is in the forward section, and
Oh.
it's from a story called "We Adopted," and it starts out like this: We hadn't planned on having any more children. Marge and I were both in our early 50s, and our children were adults. In
Mm.
fact, we didn't. This is so I follow the robot, from a dot into through adolescence in this family. It's just a very short story.
Oh
So
wow.
that's another one. And this is the one that I mentioned before about the policy. So what I was saying was that this story follows this family adopts a robot. Really, it's just like a dot,
Mm.
and we follow it on through adolescence.
Oh
That's
wow.
this story. So this is from the forward section of the book, which
Oh.
includes a couple of sci-fi stories.
Oh
This one is
wow.
also in the forward section, and this is about the politician with the spring head, and he ends up running on a platform of eggs for everyone. It's a
Mm.
square deal. He yeah, he figures out a way to make the chickens lay square eggs.
Oh wow. That's quite
And
amazing to know, really.
the story is less than 100 words,
Wow.
and that's the book.
Wow. Amazing, really. That was really amazing. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Before we wrap up, yeah, we're almost rounding up. Before we wrap up, do you have any other thing you would like to share with the viewers about your books that we did not mention in this interview and you'd love the viewers to know? Is there anything?
Asked me before about the last story in the book is called Shrouded in Mystery. And it I wrote this from a prompt where it was about I wanted to write about a scientific discovery that could change the world.
Oh, wow.
And so the story focuses on the Shroud of Turin. Are you familiar with the Shroud of Turin?
Nope.
So um, the Shroud of Turin, it's a real thing, Turin. You can look it up. But I wanted to write something that was a twist between kind of like real life and fiction, was something that kind of emerged from this story. I don't want to spoil it, but the Shroud of Turin, it's a fine linen that is somehow imprinted with the blood of a man who has been crucified, and it's about 14 foot long. It's a full body image, and it shows both the front and the back of the man. And so this imprint renders the guy's face in detail, including blood marks that are consistent with the crown of thorns. It also shows wounds that are consistent with scourging and crucifixion.
Mm,
And that was, I will say, the way crucifixion was done during the first century. So in 1988, the Catholic
yeah.
Church permitted a sample of this shroud to be tested. And what they found was that the linen was not from the first century, but actually from the 13th century.
Wow.
So then people had to question, well, then, where did this come from, or what was this really about? But
Mm,
that wasn't the whole story. So it turns out that the sample that they tested was from just a corner of the shroud that had been in a fire during the 13th century and that was repaired by the nuns. So
oh,
that left open this question of, well, what about this shroud? So my story talks about a team of, I'll call them wildcats, who wanted to do some further testing. And
mm,
so, given the church's position on the matter, they figured it was better to beg forgiveness than to ask for permission.
mm.
So that's kind of where it goes, and the story explores the intersection between science and religion. So the crew includes an Italian archbishop, a French physicist, and a world-renowned archaeologist.
Mm.
So
Oh,
the funny thing, there was something really quirky that happened when this was a story I was writing before Easter, and I felt like compelled to finish the story. I didn't really know. I don't plot out all my stories. Sometimes I just kind of let the stories unfold, and I didn't
interesting.
know how to end the story. So
Oh,
I got
wow.
stuck. And so what I did was I did a little further research,
Mm.
and thanks to some serendipity, I call it a God incident, I came across some new evidence that really stunned me. So I had to weave it in, and it makes the story even more powerful.
Oh,
And it's a
wow.
fitting ending to my quirky book.
Mm. That's very interesting. I love your description of this, and it really sounds quite amazing, awesome, and lovely to me. Thank you so much for sharing. And now, just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of your book. On what platform is it available on for purchase?
It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble, or you can go to charlesbenz.com and purchase it there, either hardbound, paperback, or ebook.
That's gr-
charlesbins.com.
that's great. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Shout's Pink's books directly on Amazon, on his website, and also on other platform. I also left links to his social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Charles, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I must say it's more than awesome and very great having this lovely conversation with you around your books. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, Peter.